Welcome, I'm Annihilator and you're at One Full Gaming. So what we're doing today is we're going through 7 days to die's video options, what their performance impact is on your system, and what you should enable or disable or turn down to get the most amount of frame rate for your system. And hopefully you'll get better FPS by the end of this video. So stay tuned, we're starting right now. So this is a technical bit where I explain the difference between the 7 days to die engine and pretty much any other game engine out there, barring a few examples. So games like 7 days to die, Space Engineers, Minecraft, things like that run on something what we call voxels. Now voxels, to my limited knowledge and understanding, what we call 3D sprites. Now that lets them be destroyed and made malleable in the world. Any other game like Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, Gears of War, you name it, they all use what we call static meshes or static polygons. Now those cannot be changed physically in the world. They are pre-calculated by the game engine long before the game starts up, and they never change. A voxel-based engine is always changing. It is always calculating. If you look at things like Space Engineers and 7 Days to Die specifically, they are always calculating what's going on in the world. That's why the worlds are so much more heavy on your system resources than anything else. Because if you think of it, now it's made into a cube. So a cube, and the cube is filled with blocks. And each one of those blocks, including the air blocks, and everything down to bedrock and everything to the sky limit, has to be calculated, not once, constantly. So you dig a hole. That now has to calculate every block around it, so every face, and the air, what is now getting affected because you made that hole. Now you can see the problem. You go throw down a stick of dynamite. It blows a hole in the terrain. Great, cool. But it now has to calculate what changed in the air, what changed in the landscape, and if there's water involved, the calculations happen again. So that is the main difference in my limited technical understanding. I'm not a game developer, but that's what I've been able to research. That is the main difference. In Unreal, if you fire a missile into a wall, it's going to leave a scorch mark on the wall, but the wall is not going to do anything. So as today, you take a rocket launcher, you fire it into a wall, it's going to make a hole in that wall. And that is the main difference. It now has to calculate that hole. And that is the biggest difference between everything. It's always calculating, it's always rendering. That is why 7 Days to Die runs so much, I won't say poorly, but it's a lot more intensive on your system, is because of all the calculations it's doing all the time. Yes, it's still in alpha and all that kind of stuff, but if you go play something like Space Engineers, which is based on the same principle, it's the same thing. You start building massive spaceships, you build a massive station, and your performance goes through the floor because it now has to calculate all those blocks, how are they attached, what are they attached to, because everything can break at any time. That's why in things like Space Engineers you get something called clang, is where the physics engine just freaks out and then something loses its mind. That's basically it for this section, guys. We're now going to get into the actual settings, but I felt you needed a bit of a technical background on the main difference between like Unreal and a voxel-based engine. The first thing we're going to be looking at under your video settings is your display settings. Now, as per Fatal on the Fun Pumps forum, the biggest thing that's going to have impact on your frame rate in 7 Days to Die is your resolution. Now, most people would run this at the default or the native resolution of their monitor. I've got a 1440p monitor, so that's why I have it at 2560 by 1440. So if your game is running really poorly, I would highly suggest you drop this down below your native resolution. There is another option which we'll get to right now. So full screen is pretty much what it says, is at full screen or windowed mode. I just normally leave it on full screen. This can have an impact on your performance if you run it in windowed mode. So if you want more performance, run it full screen. This is something new that they've put in for Alpha 19. So dynamic resolution mode. If you turn this on, and it's on auto. So whenever the game's frame rate drops to 30 frames per second, it will start dynamically reducing your resolution. So say it's at 2560 by 1440 and my frame rate goes below 30 frames a second. The game will automatically drop my resolution down in stages until my frame rate goes above 30 or more, and then it will dynamically adjust that up and down. So if you've got a low-end system, I highly suggest turning this on, because it really will help you quite a lot. If you're an expert user or you've got a good system, turn it off, because you know what you're doing or you don't need it. If you've got something like a 2080 or an 5700 XT or something like that, you're not going to be needing this. But if you want to use it, the option is there for you. So you can also change the frame rate you want and the dynamic resolution scale if you want to change that as well. I just leave all of this on off by default. Next one is VSync, or your vertical sync. So this syncs your frame rate coming out of your graphics card to your monitor's frame rate. So my monitor, for instance, can do a maximum of 75 Hertz or 75 frames per second. So the game won't go above that. It's to eliminate something what we call screen tearing. I'll see if I can do an example of it in game, but essentially the bottom of the screen and the top of the screen tear apart. So you'll have one part of the frame here and another part of the frame here. It happens very, very quickly, but it does happen. So with vertical sync, it's designed to stop that. And because my monitor is an AMD Sync compatible monitor and a G-Sync compatible monitor, I turn mine on to help me with that. It's got a very low impact. I just turn it on because I hate screen tearing. Brightness is pretty much what it says. It's how dark or bright the game is, because I record a lot of YouTube footage. I tend to turn my brightness up in game so my viewers can actually see what is going on. Especially with Alpha 19, with the change to the linear lighting system, dark places are really dark. So you need to have torches and that kind of stuff. So I do turn it up for that kind of thing. Field of view, this is purely preference on what you want to play on. Default, it's on 65. I tend to run it maxed out because I used to play Quake and that a lot, and that had a 95-degree field of view. So it's the method I prefer playing. Field of view is this. How much are your in-game eyeballs seeing? So the wider your field of view, the more your character can see. So we'll demonstrate that in-game. Now we're going to look at our quality menu. So the quality menu is where you're going to spend most of your time optimizing your game for better performance. Now let's have a look at a couple of these. So there's a good couple of quality presets. It's currently set to ultra, but if we drop down, it goes to high, medium, low, and then lowest. So we'll start at lowest and work our way up. Now lowest, or you can do custom depending on what you want. Lowest is obviously the lowest it will go. Now we're going to go through each one of these options and show you what they do. We're going to go through each one of these options and what their meaning is and what their performance impact is going to be. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be anti-aliasing. Now anti-aliasing is pretty much what it says there. Removes jagged edges from the object. Now everything in a game world is made out of pixels, so square blocks. Now square blocks, as by their nature, if you've got two like that, they're going to be a jagged edge. Anti-aliasing smooths out those jagged edges. It is much more complicated than that, but in-game, that's all you actually really need to know about it. So I'm going to show you now in-game what that looks like. Well, we're in-game, so it's just the world I've got. Now, if you look at the top of this wooden frame here, if you look at that top edge, I'm currently in ultra settings in 7 Days to Die and ultra anti-aliasing. So we're now going to go into video settings and I'm just going to turn it off. Now instantly you can see, if you look at there, you can see all the jagged edges along the top of that frame and the bottom and the sides. So that's essentially what it does. It smooths out all those jagged edges so it gives you a better visual image. It's also performance impact is quite high. 7 Days to Die doesn't have all the fancy other versions of anti-aliasing you do get from both ATI and NVIDIA. So for me, if I'm battling on game performance, it's one of the first things I turn down to low or medium, depending on the game itself. So if you're battling, this is one of the ones I would definitely classify as turning down to get more performance. Back in the game, and we've got the texture settings set to the lowest. Let's have a look around. So if you look at the shotgun Messiah here, and you look at the concrete texture themselves, they don't look really all that good. If you look at the ground here, it looks pretty terrible. The grass as well, and the rock. So even this wall, if you look at the metal textures and the wood, it's look really quite bad. Now we're just going to go to our options and set them back to full, and we're going to put that to ultra, and then again on high. Just give it a second or two to load, and there we go. Alright, so you can see the rock textures look a hang of a lot better. The concrete textures also look a lot better, and the ground, it actually does not look like a very mess, and nor does the grass. So that's one of the ways you can get a big improvement on your performance, is by lowering your texture quality. You can see like the bump mapping and all that in the textures. It actually looks quite nice now. So that's one of the big ways you can improve your performance. Welcome back. So we're here in Navigain, and just at a random body of water, and I need to turn off the AI there. Now you'll see here the lake, and this is what they mean by reflection quality. Okay, so I'm now going to turn that on because that is off. So I'm just going to max it out, Ultra Plus, and the shadows I'm also going to turn on. And that is pretty much a night and day difference you can see there, of why it can hurt your performance and why you may want to turn it down. So if we do turn it down to say medium, let's go reflection, and let's just put it down to medium. So you can see there on medium, once it's finished loading, you can see it's not as glossy, it's not as shiny as on Ultra Plus. But for me, it doesn't really make that much a difference. I've got a 2070 Super, so it's okay for me currently. But this is a good spot where it's showing off my FPS dips. Now the next one is going to be our shadows. So you can see here I'm looking at the legs. I'm just turning on God mode so we can go underwater. And now you see there's no shadows, so I'm going to turn the shadows on. And currently we're at 45 odd FPS. So I'm going to turn that on and make it far. Alright, so I've lost there 5 FPS. It may not sound much, but it is quite a bit. So if you look here, the shadows there, the shadows and water go really hand in hand with each other. Reflected shadows deals with the water and reflections and things like that. So I'm just going to go above the water there, and you can see there it is. So if I now go into my video settings again, and then just go, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, and I go say near. Okay, just give it a chance to initialize. There we go. So that didn't really make that much of a difference. So if I now go further into it and go off. Okay, so I do get quite a bit of FPS boost from turning off shadows. This is already at high, and the particle distance is at 100%. So particles deals with water, fire, things, explosions, things like that. So we're getting around 40 FPS currently here in this situation, between 37 and 40. So if I now go into my video settings and go down to water quality, we've only got really two options, low and high. So, and we're going to drop our particles by 50%. All right, so that again for me didn't make any real difference, but you can see it changed the water surface. The water surface looks dramatically different from going from low to high. All right, so there's a lot more undulations, there's a lot more waves in the water on high. For the next one is our view distance. Now view distance, you can't set it in game, you can only set it from the menu. So I'm going to set this down to low. View distance is how far you can see things from your perspective. So at low, it's quite short. And I'm going to set my LOD. So LOD stands for level of detail. It's the amount of detail you see on distant objects and how soon they pop into frame. So I'm going to put that at 50%. Ooh. Okay, as close. There we go. I had 50. All right, there we go, 50%. And now we're going to go change into the game quickly. Okay, we're back in game, and now you'll see if you look at the grass specifically on that bank, you can see as I come closer, the grass will start popping up. It will start appearing. My frame rate is suffering a bit currently because of all the settings I do have turned on. But you can see as we go up the hill, then you see there's a perfect example of that's your LOD distance. So now if I go back to our video settings and I crank it to max, and now you see the view distance, I can't change that because I'm in game. And now if we carry on, if you now watch the wood fence, okay, you can still see it popping in there, but it's not as bad as it was. All right, now if I now go and change my video settings again and put my view distance. Now view distance again is another thing that has got a high impact on your system, as you can see there, and also level of detail. All right, so now we've got the view distance set to a bit further, or nearly max, and you can see how things spawn a bit further away. We can see a bit more detail in the distance. Again, this will be very dependent on your system and your system resources, how much this impact is going to have on your system. But these ones, again, are quite heavy on your system. Okay, the next group of items we're going to be looking at under our video settings is going to be our terrain quality, grass distance, object quality. Under those three, occlusion, I can't change in-game, but occlusion is drawing things, not drawing things you can't see. So if you're behind a building and you can't see what's in the next room, it won't draw it. So it does save a lot of important CPU performance, more than graphical performance. So let's look at terrain quality. So again, I'm going to turn this all the way to lowest. Same with this one. And now we're going to go there. Okay. Now let's just get up the hill. Okay, now you can see already with the trees. That's a perfect example. You see the trees, that isn't even 30 or 40 meters away, and you can see how ugly the trees are. And if you look at like the destroyed trees there, it's the same thing. It really drops down the graphics a lot when you turn these options off for your trees and your terrain and that. And if you look specifically at like the grass and that, it's very flat. It's quite ugly, to be honest. These ones again do have quite the impact on your system, but I only really suggest turning them really down if you haven't turned off shadows and reflections and anti-aliasing first. These ones I personally don't like turning them off. There's other stuff I prefer to turn off than these, which we're going to get to now. So let's quickly turn it up. So we're just going to go up to medium here, and you'll see even at medium what a difference this will make. All right, so you can see at medium, it actually looks like a tree, not a splat of color on the landscape. So the trees look like trees. These don't look like smears as well. The terrain looks a lot better. So all in all, it looks a lot better than on lowest. Unless you're running like a 750 or even a 650, a GTX or a AMD 360 or 350 or a really old weak graphics card, then run it at that. But other than that, try and keep it on medium, because you'll see it's just so ugly. It's not worth playing. Okay, the last grouping is very much for added visual effects in the game more than anything else. So these ones, depending on what you like, what your preference is, we're going to go through them and if you want them on or off. So bloom is a glow around bright headlight. So that's, if you look at a light, it'll have that like almost like a halo around the light. It depends on the game. For me, a lot of times they overdo it, they overcook it. 7 days, I don't mind. There's not that many lights. So we'll just leave that off for now. Depth of field, it's emulating a distant camera object. Now, I don't like it. I generally turn depth of field off. Motion blur, do not like. I dislike motion blur intensely. I hate it when I don't look at things blurry when I move faster in real life. So I don't like it in the game. So I'll always turn off motion blur, but again, that's according to what your performance and what you like. So it's a medium, or sorry, high impact according to the game, but I find it doesn't really impact you that much. So this one, your screen space, ambient occlusion, this draws more detailed shadows on objects. So this can be a bit of a performance impact, but it's not too bad. Sun shafts, reflections and sun shafts themselves go hand in hand. Now these ones can be impactful depending on your your graphics card. If you've got an RX 350 or a GTX 650, something like that, you're going to run out of RAM, video RAM. You need more than 2 gigs of video RAM to run this. Okay, so we're going to look at the game now currently with all of this on off. Okay. Now, I've set the time to, it's just sun setting here. Now, if this was on, you would see halos or light rays coming through the trees. And I'm just going to turn on God mode. You would see like reflections coming off these metal objects down here. So I'm now going to turn those back on just to give you an indication. And turn all of those on. Motion blur to normal. All right, and there we go. All right, and you can see already that there you can see it's a dramatic difference for me. The visual quality on the sun rays coming through the trees, it looks really good. I really like the effect. Performance doesn't hit you too much, but you can see here, you can see the reflections now coming off the roof, the glinting like that, coming off the metal signs. So you lose a lot of that when you turn those options off. Now motion blur, you can see it now when I'm flicking left and right. That's the motion blur there. Again, it's not something I like all too much. Now halos, this isn't really in a bright enough light, but you can get the idea. I don't think there's anything else in here, not really. So those cover the other options. So let's get to the last one that we didn't cover because I need to be in menu for that. Okay. So the last one is occlusion. So this one impacts your CPU more than it does your graphics card. But what it does, all computer games do it. They just don't draw things in the game you as a character cannot see. So if you can't see what's behind you, why should the game render it? It doesn't do it. All games do it. It's a trick they use to keep your performance up. They've added this in to do the same. So disables drawing of objects that are not visible. It is nearly impossible for me to show you this in game because I can only show you what the character sees. But it affects your CPU more than your graphics card. So disable this if you are having CPU bottlenecks. Now, we're going to get to the portion of the video. So I've watched all of this. I want to get to the meat and potatoes. What do I turn off? What do I keep on? We're going to show you that right now. The biggest killer of your frame rate in this game is your resolution, as per the fun pimps. So we're currently at around 40 FPS. So I'm at 1440p. All I'm going to do very quickly is I'm just going to drop my resolution down to 1080. Now you'll see we're at nearly 60 FPS and we're still at ultra settings. Okay, I'm not at my native resolution anymore, but I've nearly got 60 FPS. So I'm pretty happy with that. So you could do it that way. You just drop your resolution down one tier and you've still got all the gorgeous effects and all of this kind of stuff. The biggest killer frame rate, as I said, is your resolution. But I hear you. I don't want to drop my native resolution. What else can we do? So we're going to put our resolution back to what it's supposed to be. And now quality, there's a couple things you turn off here. The first one, Anti-Aliasing. If you're at 1440p, you don't need it. Next one, reflection quality. Turn that off. Reflected shadows, off. Shadows distance, low. Okay, do those first and then we can go from there. So we were at 40, and now if you look at it, we're at a steady 53, 54 frames per second by turning off those 4 options. 4, not 3, 4. So turn those off and then we can go from there. Now next, what I also do, this is just my personal preference. Bloom, depth of field, motion blur. Specifically motion blur, I do not like the effect it gives. Depth of field's okay. Bloom, I'll sometimes leave on. Right, there we go. 60 frames per second. So those are some of the options you can tweak. I've got everything else. My textures are still maxed. You can still see I've got all the trees going. I'm at 1440p. The most impactful is going to be anti-aliasing, shadows, reflections. Turn those off first. If you're still battling, turn your other stuff down. Turn your level of detail down next. If you're still battling with that, if you truly do have a potato of a PC, start at low. Start at low and work your way up to get some kind of good visual compromise. Because a lot of people want 60 FPS or more, but if you do have a PC that can't do 60 FPS and you can only do 30 FPS, start at lowest or low and work your way up. You're never going to run it with anti-aliasing on those kind of PCs, but maybe you can play it with slightly better graphics, because what it looks like is truly terrible. If you do have a truly potato PC, this is what I run on my laptop when I'm away, because I've got an 8-year-old laptop and this is what I can play on. So yeah, welcome to Smudgeville, population U. Now the problem is with this, it's very unimmersive. It's really, really bad. I mean, those trees look at as something like 1994 Delta Force. So what can we do? You can start by increasing your texture quality settings. So texture quality, maybe go half. Your terrain quality, go low. Grass distance, low. And maybe that's on low. So let's see how we do on that, what that looks like. All right, so that's already a lot better. The trees, okay, the far trees still look smudges, but at least when you're playing close, things look okay. And from there, you'll just have to see what kind of options you go. If you, as I said, if you have a really old graphics card, start at the lowest and work your way up until you get a decent frame rate. Well, everybody, that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you do find a little bit of extra performance, as I've stated there. So just to finalize, the best things you can do if you don't want to drop your resolution, not your frame rate, is you turn off anti-aliasing first, either low or off. Then you drop your shadows to low or off, and then reflections. From there, it's going to be a juggle of your different settings. There will be a chart earlier in the video that will show you what has got the most performance impact on your system. And if you do truly have a potato, we've covered that, what you need to do to get that to run. And I do apologize if you do have such a bad system like my laptop, because it's what I use when I go away. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If it does help you, give it a big thumbs up, share the video far and wide, and please do subscribe. I really enjoy making this kind of stuff for you, and we'll see you again soon. The next episode of Project Restoration will be out as well. So enjoy it, and we'll be back with another one soon. Cheers.